Can I just go back to the kind of, as what you might call the multicultural agenda, which is about making audiences, it's a BBC sort of issue, it's about making audiences reflect the nation and how you do that. And you said really basically as almost like a rolling programme of exhibitions, in a sense took the V&A out, had particular interest to particular groups. And in a sense what you're doing is building, I mean, Buddhas are of interest to all of us, but they may be of particular interest. So or black design is also, is of interest to us, all of us, but it also licenses a different group in. Do you think of that in a coherent whole way, if that makes sense? When you're thinking forward for the V&A, or is not, or you just think you'll do it?
So what you say is true, yes. Everyone's interested in their own thing.
Yes.
If you open a gallery of Islamic art, then a lot more veil-wearing women from Muslim backgrounds come into the museum than would otherwise be the case. That's observably the case, and it's incredibly predictable. If you do a weekend on Persian themes, the museum will be full of earrings, and that's just how it is. It's very straightforward. When people say it's difficult, it's not. Actually, it's really easy, certainly in my experience, to attract different audiences. All you do is you just aim them at different audiences, and then they come.
It's the generating output.
I think that people have a lot of, I'm talking about misconceptions. I mean, an interesting misconception is that the age profile of the audience for the V&A is skewed in particular ways. But if I were to tell you which is the most, how it's skewed, you would probably be surprised. So actually, the audience, or the age group with which the V&A is most popular is 16 to 24. So we have a higher representation of 16 to 24-year-olds than any other age.
You're doing more better than the BBC, I think.
Possibly, I don't really know. Students like V&As. Basically, it's because they're all students, they like going to the V&A. Where were we? What were you asking me? I can't remember that.
Whether you had a rolling...
was it coherent? Yes, of course. I mean, I think it's quite coherent. I mean, first of all, if you're paid for by the taxpayer, probably a good idea to appeal broadly to the population as a whole. Secondly, if you're trying to raise money, it's certainly a good idea to be popular with rich people, like the Chinese, the Indians, people from the Islamic world, and so on. I mean, the idea that this is some kind of, altruistic do-goodism is, I think, sort of slightly missing the point, which is Britain is one of the least successful economies in the world, and everywhere else people are making tons of money. So actually, if we want to do well, we need to appeal to people from parts of the world where there's a lot of wealth being created. So that's not really about a kind of floppy liberal, 1990s.
Well, there's two parts.
It's about enlightened self-interest,
yeah.
Just as it would be enlightened self-interest to attract the most able people you could to work in the organisation. And responding to what you said earlier on, yes, the V&A's workforce does look approximately like the country as a whole. That's to say, the representation of ethnic minorities in our workforce is pretty similar to the population.
In universities, one of the interesting things about funding, in a way, is that the money that is very attractive is the money that you get from foreign students. Because they come in, that money comes, you gain it.
Yes.
It's above the line, as it were. It's additional. Yeah. It's very flexible. You can do things with it that you can't do with the funding you get below the line, if that makes sense. Also, and I think observably, now I'm all in favour of vast numbers of foreign students coming through, absolutely in favour of that. But it's very noticeable over the last 20 years that, in a way, there's been a turning round to those foreign. They become more important because the money is more important, because it gives you money in hand. And there is a downside to that, which is, actually the downside of universities is that I think we've not paid enough attention to Britain, actually, and to British students. Does that feel a story that's at all familiar?
Well, I'm sure all of us, when we think about it, we would have to recognise that the most stubbornly disadvantaged group in Britain today is male or white working class. Those are the people who we, I think, all have difficulty with. What you said about foreign students, of course, has an equivalent in the world of museums. That's to say that just as education is increasingly dependent on overseas students for its financial viability, so is our cultural world. And of course, I think, we are all of us increasingly vulnerable as a result, because the reason why overseas students come to Britain, and the reason why tourists come, and the reason why people will put money into our arts and cultural organisations is our international reputation. But our international reputation, I think, is quite shaky. And asking overseas students to pay the really substantial fees that they have to pay now depends on their belief that paying those fees will deliver to them something which is going to be of sufficient value to them in their later career to make it worthwhile, not actually for them, but probably for their parents. I think that if we allow the reputation of places like Oxford, for example, to falter internationally, we're going to be in significant trouble, because the difference between it being worthwhile and it not being worthwhile is it's a flip, isn't it? I mean, if being educated, maybe not at Oxford, but say at one of our lesser known universities, is suddenly seen not to bring prestige with it, then it's not worth a bit less, it's worth nothing. Because actually it's worth nothing to say I was educated in a place that has no prestige. There is something similar about our cultural institutions. I think often we underestimate the extent to which our kind of national interest is dependent on the continuing reputation of some of those institutions.
And it seems to me reputation depends in a sense on intelligent engagement with the world. So it isn't a reputational good. It is also about, it has real value, as it were. Reputations aren't frothy things. They're things that are based on the people's experience, actually.
Yes.
And actually, it seems to me that our museums, our arts, have done tremendously well for Britain. Yes.
Well, why would I dissent from that? I mean, something which I see said often is that arts flourish in adversity. It's commonly stated. And I have struggled, there are people here who know much more about the history of art than I do, but I have struggled to think, in terms of the history of visual arts, when that was true. Did they struggle in adversity in Florence? Did they struggle in adversity during the Golden Age of the Netherlands? Did they struggle in adversity in America in the 1950s? I simply cannot think in the visual arts of a good counter case. As far as I can see, excellence almost always goes with wealth. So we are in a difficult place, I would say. And if there is grounds for hope, then the grounds for hope are that organisations like the Royal Opera House are increasingly genuinely international organisations. The V&A aims to be a genuinely international organisation. We travel 20 or 30 exhibitions around the world, and we do get increasingly support from elsewhere, not just from the United Kingdom. Whether that's a strategy that can succeed, I don't know. But what I am clear is that reliance on core funding from the British government is not a good long-term strategy, and we can see that. And we've seen that not just in the last Arts Council round of cuts, but actually I think we've seen that over the whole of the last 20, 30 years.
I was going to say it's politically different. It doesn't depend on a particular government. Karen, why do you think that arts organisations particularly work? That seems to be what's really interesting. Why is it that arts work for these?
Why do they work for these young?
Yes. Yes. Why is that? I mean, the New Deal of the Mind started out as a sort of replica of Franklin D. Roosevelt's notion that you could, in the New Deal, take arts and making of the arts, and whole bits of American arts like woodcutting were a product of that kind of investment and belief, and it also gave artists actually, very interestingly, new intellectual challenges. I mean, they were sent out to do new work, which is So I think that's the other bit of it, that, Peter Brook, I just went to see Peter Brook's extraordinary reimagination of what theatre might be, which is now rather standard. I mean, all theatres start around with rehearsals and doing cartwheeling, but when he did it, he was absolutely reimagining audiences and the very content of what he was doing. And that seems to me the other issue. So why do the arts work with young?
Yeah, so first of all, I think just to touch upon what we're trying to mimic, and that is what Roosevelt did during the New Deal. And I think most people here probably knew what Roosevelt did, yeah? So, jobs creation program during the Depression, as well as placing people into jobs, constructing highways and dams. He also commissioned artists to paint murals in federal buildings, employed musicians to perform in orchestras around the country. He employed people to record the stories of the last living slaves, and that's one of the bases of African American history in the States. And a number of very famous artists benefit from these schemes. So you've got people like Jackson Pollock, Saul Bellow, Mark Rothko. So anyway, New Deal of the Mind, we're trying to basically do the same thing, so lofty goal. As well as we believe that we have a number of unemployed people in work, unemployed people out of work, yes? So not in work, unemployed people in work is an oxymoron. Anyway, unemployed people. We know that even though we are going through a tough time at the moment, and despite the most recent cuts with the Arts Council, that the creative sector does continue to grow. The creative sector, the UK's creative sector is the largest in the EU. Nesta predicts that in 4 years' time, more people will be employed in the creative sector than in financial services. Seems a bit strange, but anyway. Maybe they're all going to Switzerland. So, but basically, what that tells us at New Deal of the Mind is that we have a problem with unemployment, we have a creative sector, surely we can find a match just like Roosevelt did, right? So that's what we do. And building upon your point, Jean, is that when we put these people, these young unemployed people who've been unemployed for a significant period of time into the arts, they thrive. They thrive, I think, and generalisation again, is because a lot of them haven't done well in traditional forms of education. Yeah? You put them in a cultural institution, it's another way for them to express themselves. But building upon what we're trying to do with New Deal of the Mind, sort of taking it to the next level, building upon Roosevelt's legacy creation. What we're trying to do with some of our job placements is generate a legacy, a cultural legacy. So for example, one of our projects, you might have read about it in the news last year, British Council, one of our partners, they had all of these films that were made in the 1930s and 40s. You know those films that they distribute to the colonies like Australia, and that's where I'm from, and they tell you what it was to be British and what justice was and all those wonderful things. So we found that all of these films were just sitting in film canisters over at the BFI. Yeah? Degenerating, really? Oh no, we can't say that because the woman that looks after them, I hope isn't in this audience, did a very good job at looking after them. So they weren't, but not many people got to see them. So we got some unemployed people, yeah? We taught them how to digitize the films, and these kids digitized these films, and you can now access them online, yeah? And these are films that were just sitting in film canisters at the BFI. So the goal is not necessarily, okay, we've done the jobs, we're giving them skills, but we're also generating an artistic legacy. And that's really what we're trying to do, so that we can look back on this period in time and say, look what we created. And we're doing a number of projects like that. They're projects that are fabulous, and they're fun. I had to go to this briefing because we get most of our funding from the Department of Work and Pensions, because we've got unemployed people into work. And I had to go to this really boring seminar up in Birmingham about funding, held by the DWP. And we place all of our ads at Job Centre Plus, that's why we get such a diverse demographic. And they were telling us how to make our jobs appealing, you know, how do you make and we've always found that we have, hundreds of people applying for our jobs. But then I found out about the types of jobs that were being advertised at Job Centre Plus, and I'm not kidding. The example that was used was, we've got a job, someone picking dog crap off the street. How do we make that appealing? So, I don't care how you describe it, it's not something I ever wanted to stay on the dole. But I think they are really fabulous jobs. They're so interesting. You're working at amazing organisations. You know, we have a kid who's just finished, and he was building sets for the Royal Court at Sloane Square. Carpentry skills, transferable skills, fabulous skills. So, you know, they're interesting. I think that they are, going back to your question, they're interesting, you know, in this sort of touchy-feely environment, which is quite good for this demographic. You know, they're able to offer their digital skills to these arts organisations. They're not usually very good at that. And, you know, it speaks to, you know, it's not like school. So that's why I think it does so well.